Alrighty, we're going to do a quick walkthrough of the code of the NIP system, which again stands for New Improved Point System. It's a simple MVC application, and we're going to start right with the models here. And the most important ones here are being imported right from the database. They're the user model, the ASP.NET user module, and the ledger model. The ASP.NET user model is generated through .NET and is used to allow us to authenticate methods. The user method, the user model is internal, and we use it to store a user ID, which is the same as the ASP.NET user ID. The first name, the last name, the user Slack ID, their total points, their semester points, their weekly points, and their access level. The ledger object has the ledger ID, the giver ID, the getter ID, the amount, and the reason for giving that amount. In addition to these models, we have created models for access level data, which is used to change the access level of an existing user. It requires the admin changing the access level, the brother whose access level is being changed, and the new access level. In addition to that, we have created the delete ledger data model, which is the ledger ID and the admin username, and the delete user data, which also requires the deleted user's name and the admin username. We also have a rank formatted user, which formats the user, which creates a separate user object that includes their week rank and semester rank, so we can display it on the front end. And that is all the models that we have created. In our controllers, we can go to the user registration controller, which is a simple registration controller that adds a new user object to our database. This is separate from the account controller's registration method, which is right here. This register method is, again, a .NET registration method. We've modified this slightly so that it returns the user ID, which we use in our user registration method to register a new user. A bulk of our logic is in the user controller, which, as we'll go through right now. The get method on here returns a list of all users. The get user points method gets a particular user and returns their current points as well as their ranks. The get access level gets the access level of a given user. The get points table method gets the points table for all the users. This utilizes the get access level method to get the access level of a user. If the user is an admin, it returns the access level. Otherwise, it having a little technical difficulty where system is just stuck. There we go. All right. If the user does not have an access level of 2, it returns an unauthorized. And an access level of 2 is associated with an admin. An access level of 1 is associated with an officer, and an access level of 0 is associated with just a regular brother. Get ledger method, which is right here, gets all the ledger entries if the access level is 2. Again, uses the get access level method in here and determines whether a user has access to view the ledger. If not, it returns to unauthorized. If a bad request is issued, then it returns that. The give points method is very similar to the get methods, except it determines if the access level is greater than 0, then a user should be able to give points. It's a giver, a getter, an amount, a reason, and a giver ID. For the ledger key, what we've done is determine the maximum ledger key currently in the ledger and incremented it to, by 1. This should only throw an exception if there are no ledger keys, in which case a ledger key is assigned to 0, which it already is. that if the user has appropriate access, it sets the appropriate properties and saves changes and returns a created access code. Otherwise, it returns an unauthorized, which is the else clause of this if. And if there is a bad request, it returns bad request. The change access method, again, if the access level is 2, it works on changes the access level of a given brother in the database and returns an unauthorized if the access level is inappropriate, or if there's a bad request, it returns a bad request. This delete method deletes items from the ledger, and when it does that, it also reverses all of the actions that are associated with it. So if a user was given 10 points, those are reversed here. And this returns an accepted status code, bad request if there's any error, and if access level is not 2, it returns an unauthorized. Same goes for the delete user method, similar to deleting a ledger item. It just deletes the user from our entities model and returns an accepted code, a bad request if there is an exception, and an unauthorized if the access level is not 2. These private methods of get week rank and get semester rank sort the order list descending based on weekly points and semester points respectively, and gets the index of the user. If the index is 0, which means they're at the top of the list, it would return a 1. If the user's current, if the user had the previous user also has the same amount of points, it starts decrementing the index value until it either is not true or it reaches an index of 0, in which case it just returns index plus 1. And once this while loop terminates, it would pull out of error and return an index plus 1. If this condition does not exist, it just returns index plus 1. The next method is get semester rank, which is very similar to get week rank, except that it returns the semester ranks and bases on semester points. The other private method that we have here is ID to name, which takes the user ID of a given user and it returns their name. We use this primarily to translate ledger IDs to a more displayable format. That is all for our controllers. Going into our HTML pages, they're just tables. There are divs and tables which are hidden based on whether or not an appropriate user has access level. We'll review that when we review the JavaScript. The divs here are the view div, which contains the initial table that we see with the user's points, the give div, which displays the give table. We have the admin panel div, which displays the admin panel, as well as the all points div, which contains the table with everyone's points once the viewpoints table button is clicked. We have the ledger div, which displays the ledger once the ledger div is clicked, view ledger is clicked. We have the access level div, which once change access level is clicked, is displayed. Also have the delete user div, which displays the table to delete users, as well as a success modal, an error modal, and a div error span that shows appropriately when certain buttons are clicked, as we saw in the front-end demo. That's for the home page. As far as our registration page goes, it's similarly just a table that displays first name, last name, Slack IDs, emails, password, and a confirmation, which and once the register button is clicked, the JavaScript starts acting and does the appropriate things as necessary. Login is even simpler. It's just an email and a password, similar to the registration page, with the exception of the remaining columns that, like the registration page and this page both contain an error div, which displays if there are any errors, and has the login.js JavaScript associated with it. So let's run through all the JavaScripts really quickly, starting with the registration one first. On registration, the first thing that happens is the account register method is called. If that's a success, then our user registration, the registration that we have in the user registration controller is called, which stores the first name, the last name. The ID here is the response, which is the response from our account.register account/register method. It sets a default access level to 0, total points to 0, semester points and week points to 0. On a success, it shows the success modal, which we saw earlier in the code demo, and an error div if there's any sort of registration error. There's an internal one here and an external one, which shows a more detailed message, and we can debug that appropriately. Login is very simple. It calls a token method, which takes a username and a password and a grant type, which we specify as password, and it returns an access token and a username, among other things, which we store in our session storage, and go to the home.html page. Looking at the JavaScript code for the home.html page, the first thing to have is that we check for an access token. If that is null, it returns us to the login page. If there's any other sort of error that happens as for login, it returns right to the login.html page. The other methods that are called as soon as the page is loaded is the get user points title, which displays an individual user's point, as we saw earlier. And the other method that's called is the get access level method, which determines the user's access level, as we saw earlier. So just both AJAX calls, and based on the access level, it removes the hidden classes from the appropriate divs. So we can see here, again, the user can go in and just look at the code and remove those hidden classes, but none of those methods will work, as we saw in the user's controller, because all of them double check for authorization immediately. The remaining button here, the remaining AJAX calls here are wired with buttons. So there's a submit button on give points, which takes the information from the appropriate columns and gives the user points, makes the calls to give points, which does so. The we points table button, just you'll notice here that it adds the hidden classes to the other divs that an admin panel has access to, and hides them, and displays and removes a hidden class from the all points div. It empties this div, and then for each data value returned, it processes it and populates the table by appending the row. There's a command here for data table, which converts it to a data table, which allows us to toggle our sorts on those tables. For the view ledger, it's very similar to view points table, hides all the others, shows the ledger div, empties the ledger body, and appropriately fills that table. Over here, we'll also notice that we're adding an input button for delete, and on clicking the delete button, it calls the delete function, which is right up here, the delete row function, and it calls to delete on that particular row. So it takes the ledger ID of that, it gets it from the HTML code there, and calls the delete function on there. If there's any error, it displays it. If there is not, it just executes as necessary. That's the view ledger. For view change access, displays the change access table, which we saw earlier. It works in pretty much the same way, and it displays the table as necessary, appending all of the users into the drop-down that's dynamically created. And the change access level button here determines the access level we've selected first, and then calls the API call to change access, giving it the appropriate data, and if there's success, it shows the success modal, and if there's an error, it shows the error div on the bottom. The view delete user is similar to view change access, displays that table, removes the class on delete user div, adds a hidden class on the remainder, creates an options bar for that, and if there's any error, displays it. For the delete user here, it's wired to the delete button. It takes the appropriate info here, the admin username and the delete name, which, as we would remember, are from the delete user data model that we have, and shows success model if the deletion is successful, and an error if it's not. That is really all there is to our API here. That's all of the code on the back end. Thank you.